Welcome to the Better Events Podcast. Join two event strategists, Logan Clements and Mary Davidson, who believe we can all create, host, and attend better events. Now let's get started, and thanks for listening to the Better Events Podcast.
And welcome back to another episode of the Better Events Podcast. I'm Logan, one of your co-hosts, and I'm joined by Mary. Hey, Mary.
Hey, everyone. How's it going?
I feel like we're doing good. I was trying to think of what we wanted to do to kick off this episode today. We were thinking about talking about something that's making us happy. And so I'll go first, Mary, give you a little time to think about it. But something that's been making me happy recently is I just got back from my first in-person event. And I guess I would call it hybrid. So it's very on theme for today's discussion because it was a sporting event and the athletes and all the event staff were in person, but there were no fans. And so I had the realization that I've been doing hybrid events for years because a lot of times I do work on live sporting events where it's a hybrid event. There's an in-person, in-stadium audience, and there's the at-home audience watching on TV. And those experiences are two very different experiences. So it was this weird aha moment because I know I was feeling a little nervous as hybrid events get started, wondering what the difference was, and then all of a sudden realizing that I've been doing them. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today, I feel like is going to be very relevant to that. But Mary, what's making you happy recently?
Well, I would say a couple different things. So one thing on like a personal level, I got a hammock and I've been thinking about it for a long time. So it's a big deal. I finally got one. I put it in my backyard. And so now I've been working a little bit more out there. Not when I have a video call, because that would be a bad angle, right? But just when I'm doing
play with the angles.
I can play with the angles. Yeah. I like to slouch in my hammock. And so it's fun to be able to do work out there. And then from the event side of things as well, I am working on this 9-day event that's coming up. And there's a huge production team to make it happen. And so I've been meeting so many people who, once again, we've talked about this a little bit on podcasts before, but it's so fun because I never would have known them if it weren't for this virtual setting. And so it's just been a pleasure to get to know these talented individuals who live all over the place. And so that's been really fun to get to know each other better.
Very cool. Yes. No, we love a good virtual events team. And that is a good segue into what we're going to be talking about today, which is all about tips and tricks for creating polished hybrid events. And we are so excited for our guest. We have Anca with us, who we actually were on her podcast, and that will be coming out in the coming weeks and months, talking about the power of community over competition. So like Mary was just saying, it was very, very cool. But without further ado, I'm going to add Anca in here, and I'm going to give her a quick intro and then let her introduce herself. So Anca is the founder and creator and CEO for Trifan Events, a boutique event planning and production agency that is offering event production consultation and planning, experience design, production management, and live streaming for live, virtual, and hybrid events. She's the host of Events Demystified, a tactical podcast for anyone in the events industry, beginner or pro, where entrepreneurs, event professionals, influencers, and event industry leaders from the events community share their personal and professional experiences with her audience. Welcome, Anca. We're so happy to have you.
I had to use it.
Yes, she comes with her own sound effects.
We need that all
that's
the time.
Connected with the fact that you just came from a sporting event. I'm like, I gotta use it. I better hit the right one because I also have like this sad trombone. I'm like, that would have not been appropriate.
Yeah, that's more than maybe when we ask you to wrap it up. That's when you do the sad trombone.
Pretty much, yeah. Well, it's so exciting to be here with you ladies, and I am excited about today's episode. We had so much fun last time we recorded together, so I expect nothing less. So, introduction. I feel like you hit all the main points, Logan. I don't know what else I should say. Yeah, maybe I should probably talk about more on a personal side. I am a mom, I'm a wife, I'm an entrepreneur. I have two beautiful children. It's easy sometimes to forget that I do because I work so much. I know that sounds horrible. But no, really, I enjoy, being able to work from home. And I spent a lot of time with them in the last, 18 months since COVID. And we just came off from this amazing glamping 4th of July adventure, and it was so good to be off grid and just leave work home, leave it in the office for a little bit, and be able to just disconnect and enjoy, like literally have that quality time, be in the moment, be present, because I feel like sometimes it's so easy to forget and just, be run by your schedule and your calendar and all the meetings and all the things that we do, right?
Totally. Thank you so much for doing the personal introduction. I feel like we need to do that more sometime with our guests. We need to get on the personal level because it's just so much more relatable. And so we're so grateful to have you. Thank you for being here. And we want to touch on a little bit of why we asked you to come on the podcast, which from your bio, I think listeners could kind of figure out why that might be. But there's a handful of reasons. And part of it's what we talked about earlier, which is that it's proof that the virtual world is just amazing at connecting. So we all met virtually. We've never met in person, but we've gotten to know each other better. We work together, and it's just been a pleasure to get to know one another more. And so for that reason, we thought it'd be great to have Anca come on because she has a tremendous amount of experience with hybrid events. She has previous experience pre-pandemic with hybrid events. She's also a fellow podcaster, like we mentioned in her bio, and extremely talented with all things event and production. And so hybrid events right now, for some, are a mystery. They kind of feel scary because they seem new or more people are doing them. And so we believe that this topic is timely and will help everyone during their future of event planning. Really, we hope it will, at least. And so with that being said, we'll jump right in with our first question, which is super basic, but I think it's good to kind of start from the beginning, especially for those that might be listening who are new to the event industry. So what would you say is a hybrid event? And is this a new idea, or has it been happening pre-pandemic?
Well, that's an excellent question, Mary. And I love that Logan kind of sort of gave a little bit of the answer to that, because I love your realization that you actually been doing, hybrid events. And we maybe might not have called them hybrid events the same way we haven't talked about, or even called events that we do now virtual events. But that doesn't mean that we haven't streamed or broadcasted events in the past, right? So when it comes to the topic of what are hybrid events, quite simply, you think of a hybrid event of something that is a mix of live and a virtual event, and something that you can take your live event, complete with an audience, the content, and you add a virtual component to it so your audience can participate and engage with your event no matter where they are. And when events will go back to physical venues, and they have started in many places, and depending where you're geographically, you might have different regulations and rules based for that. But where we're at right now, I already had in June a few hybrid events. And what was good about incorporating this virtual aspect to the in-person event is being able to reach a much larger audience. And we had an attendee on location, while the majority of our audience really was online. And when it comes to virtual event, that's fantastic. But a hybrid event also means that you have to strive to strike a balance, because neither side of your audience should feel alienated, or you need to think about the content delivery and the content strategy behind all the things that you're going to put out there, and how will that meet the needs of the in-person and the virtual audience. And I feel like that's probably one of the biggest challenges. And also having the engagement thing as something that is essential as it was for virtual events, it will continue to be essential for hybrid events, because it will distinguish what makes this hybrid event different from like just a regular in-person event, because of all the tech elements that we're incorporating now to be able to reach this wider audience. And your audience might watch your event like they would watch something on television. But if you want them to be engaged, you might want to have to think about ways in which you're going to do that, either via a platform or other engagement methods and tools that can be used to engage this audience. And I guess one of the things that I want to highlight is what a hybrid event is not is streaming all your sessions and hoping that somebody will watch them or sharing some type of video content after your event, or putting your live audience before your online audience. What a hybrid event is having this streamlined and seamless integration of technology to facilitate participation between the live and the virtual audiences. And this experience will have to somehow cater to both the audience that's virtually in a view-friendly way, as well as the audience that's in person that might have such a great time that they might not want to engage with this virtual audience. And I've heard that, from other event professionals that they just joined this hybrid experience, a hybrid event, and the online audience was kind of left off, kind of forgotten, because you're having so much fun in the moment, engaging and connecting with people, especially after a time, because you haven't been able to do that in person for a while. And now it's like this virtual audience is having a huge case of FOMO because they can't do that. So then you do have to figure out a way how you're going to cater either through a different experience, maybe a VIP experience, maybe different content, so that they don't feel like, oh, we're on the sidelines here, like watching this match, but we're not really interacting in any way because nobody wants us.
Anca, I feel like you hit the nail on the head. That's something that I think pre-pandemic, a lot of people would say they were doing a hybrid event, but like you said, it was a static camera in the back of the room. It was more of like a fly in the wall experience, and most of the focus in the planning portion and the engagement was really on the people in the room, physically there. And so I know that's something that as a event planner and producer, I'm excited about for the innovation that's going to happen as we get challenged to think about those things. And how have you found that when you've been helping clients through this hybrid process, since your background's in production, so you know the tools that you need to be able to pull off a quality hybrid event? Are you encouraging them to think about the audiences as two separate groups? Are you encouraging them to try to bring them together? What is the framing you're doing?
First off, I guess the question becomes, does a hybrid event model make sense for everyone? Just because you're going to be hosting and producing an event doesn't mean that it has to be hybrid. So the first question you're going to have to ask yourself, as part of the strategy process is, why are you planning and hosting this event in the first place? And what is your event's goal? You start with the end in mind. And also you have to take in consideration this idea of duty of care. And what that means is, what are the standards that we have to meet when we're considering putting all these people in one room, and what type of risk assessment is necessary to make sure that we understand what goes into that, because safety and creating a safe on-site environment for all attendees has to be one of the main priorities. And then figure out how you're going to cater for this online audience that might have a different experience than your in-person audience. That's the next step that you're going to have to process through and come up with a game plan. Just hoping for things to work out and having no plan probably is what you see, and you will see a lot in the next events coming up. But that's not necessarily the best strategy, because what's going to happen is, if I attend your event and I'm the, say, online attendee, and your event just puts me as last place, and I feel that because nobody's connecting with me. There's no virtual MC to tell me what's happening, what's next. There's just some content that's being fed, and I'm supposed to be picking up the best pieces of that. I want to attend the next event you're going to plan, right? So the first hybrid event that you're going to plan, it's very important because it kind of sets the tone for everything else that's coming from here. So when it comes to that, I feel like there's a few things that you should consider. You have to think of the content that has to be designed to include the people in the room, but also those online as well. You have to think of the attendees in the room that maybe have a way to watch what's broadcasted, because that was another feedback that we just, I helped produce a hybrid conference in mid-June. And one of the feedback that we received was the in-person attendee had no idea what the online attendee was receiving. So they were like, well, I don't know what they were like watching or how they were, keeping engaged, because we were not able to see that side. Like, we were kind of like, here's our event, here's what we're going to do and have fun. But then what they're doing on the other side, we don't really know. At the same time, there wasn't necessarily a whole lot of interest from an in-person attendee to want to engage with the virtual attendee when they had like a whole array of people to, network with. But giving the option, giving the opportunity, especially for some event, like that by default is a networking event, I think it's something very important that has to be considered. And you might need, a camera crew in the room that is patched into the streaming service, doing B-roll and following people around and giving behind the scenes, views of what's happening, so that you really truly feel like you are part of that event and you belong there, and you're not just the fly on the wall that's supposed to be taking in whatever is given without much feedback in return. And of course on a higher budget, because we're going to touch a little bit on budget, because you cannot talk about hybrid events without touching on budget. You're going to think of like things that the more money you have to spend on this hybrid experience, the more you can make it very involved, and you can have people given the ability, especially who's watching virtually, to pick the camera angles that they want to select and they want to view, right? But just talking about that involves another level of technology, and involves more equipment, involves more labor, involves more money. So in the beginning, I don't foresee that a lot of the regular events that we would do would have that type of budget. They would probably want to elevate their experience, one step at a time. But someone that is like, has the budget, like go all out. Like I encourage you to go all out and do the best you can, because you're going to see the difference in the way your audience is going to interact, either in person or virtually.
I feel like that transitions really well into a conversation that we can continue to have about budget for hybrid events. Because I'm back here, I'm thinking like, I see the value in them, absolutely. Especially when, like you're saying, you focus on the why and you think of the end goal of the event. I also have like dollar signs like flashing in my eyes right now, because I'm like, that's just it's gonna be expensive. But then again, I don't really know. So how would you say, if we start kind of from the basics again, so how do we have a polished hybrid event on a budget if we're starting kind of smaller? What can we do?
Well, what's funny about COVID and the pandemic is that it changed the event budget to a production budget. So we don't necessarily have so much about, the cost that we used to have with regular events, which mostly was taken by venue and food and beverage and entertainment and, speakers and keynotes and who knows what else. Now, there's a lot of money that will have to be allocated. And if you didn't have that budget line in the past, you might just have to, make it and create it. Because to your question, are hybrid events more costly? Well, I guess the quick, simple answer is yes and no. Because at first, as we're looking at gathering in person, again, we will have smaller meetings, smaller gatherings, smaller events that will take in small place in smaller rooms. The cost of in-person AV production would technically be smaller as well. And same way would go to food and beverage cost. And to the production cost, however, you will need to add the cost of technology necessary to not just stream your event somewhere online, but possibly sustain and create this online venue via an app or a platform, as we were mentioning, to be able to create that engagement and give the virtual audience an experience, not just, a way of watching your event. So they can meet, they can interact, they can engage, they can partake in this event, and in a way that's easy and helpful to making meaningful connections, and to be able to maybe schedule, intentional one-on-one meetings, possibly powered by AI matchmaking, and participating in ways in which they're there to make best use of their time. So with that being said, I feel like there's definitely going to be plenty of events that won't be using a specific event platform to accomplish this, and therefore they will be keeping their costs lower. But at a minimum, you will need that budget line that I just mentioned, because you will have the in-person AV production, but also the streaming technology that will enable you so that, whatever content, whatever is happening in your in-person event is streamed online, not just by itself, but also in conjunction with some other content that will be specifically designed for this online experience. Now, luckily, in the last year and a half since we embarked on this new journey with virtual events, there's been so many resources that came out to help host and produce events that are virtual. The only barrier, I guess, to that has been time, really, how much time it requires for someone to learn and master all the tools that are out there. So I guess to recap really quick, while venue, food and beverage, and cost, went away for virtual events, production costs went up, and that will be the same with hybrid events. The production cost will still be your number one line item. The good news is that maybe, if we're to talk about sponsorships, that could be one way where you could sell sponsorship to cover the cost of this event production. And maybe the ticket sale could be your revenue. Because of the headcount reduction in the beginning, that just means that you will have some savings in the, reduction in meals, but and that will obviously leave some room for having more budget towards your production to make sure that you're able to produce a polished event. So I guess a rule of thumb, I was doing the math on some of the events that I've already worked on, and I'm already, budgeting for some hybrid events in the fall. The tech portion could be approximately 1.7 to 2 times more than your in-person or virtual event. And that's important to, to consider, because another thing that I've ran into personally was doing events in a couple of different locations away from where I'm located currently. And the vendors that I used to work with for in-person events, they're no longer there. They're no longer present. And now here's like a hole that's being created, like a black hole that's been created for resources that before I could count on and before I could, vet, because I've used them before. So because of that, I felt like the prices of even in-person production has sort of like gone up the roof, because even event production houses, they are thinking of their budget and thinking, okay, am I going to have enough labor? I might not have enough labor. So then I have to actually charge more, thinking that I might have to hire at a higher rate than what I used to pay my technicians just last year, right? So now everybody's kind of adding just that buffer of extra, just in case, like, I don't know what's going to be like in the fall. Like, is my technician going to be like $50 an hour or $150 an hour? Like, I don't know, but I have to prepare, because I need to create that buffer for me as a provider and a supplier. And then that just, gets put on me as a producer, and that gets passed on to the client. And it's just this rolling effect of a snowball that's like some of the events that I used to plan and produce. I've got proposals on just for the in-person audiovisual production that were 3 times as much.
Oh my
and
gosh.
I was like somewhat like shocked. I'm like, wait a second.
I've heard this. No, there's other event professionals that we've been talking with who are saying that do you call it like price gouging or just kind of the rebound from COVID?
Yeah.
But I'm with you that I think some of it's not even people trying to make up for lost time, but there's a labor shortage already from people who pivoted out of events once everything shut down. And then, I think the more complimentary side that I'm finding is people that are good at virtual event production are busy and getting hired more, and therefore either rates are going up, or like you said, you just need to be more competitive and have that buffer in case you need to hire new people or train people or whatever it is. I think, though, what I'm excited about hearing you talk about all of that, Anca, is that the in-person rule of thumb is always like, how do you save money? It's like invite less people, because your food and beverage goes down. Anybody who's planning a wedding, that's what your wedding planner will tell you no matter what. It's like, if you want to save costs, invite less people.
Yep.
But the opportunity there with hybrid is its scalability. That sure, certain platforms, like you're saying, those virtual event platforms do charge per person, but doing a stream on YouTube or something that you're putting all your money in the labor and the talent behind it versus a big fancy virtual venue, that's incredibly scalable. You could have 50 people watch it, or you could have 5,000 people watch it, and the cost wouldn't go up for that, which I think is an exciting part that I'm hoping anybody listening to this who's thinking about having a hybrid aspect, big, that kind of key takeaway, that you can make it scalable and, have that really good return on your investment. But it's not just by having a static camera in the back of the room and expecting people to show up, because attendees' expectations, are higher. So
exactly. And to add to that, I mean, some of the easiest ways to make that event have this polished look is like branding. Spend some time to create some branded graphics, some transitions, backgrounds, labels with your events, colors, and fonts. And that instantly gives you a well-rounded look to your event that Zoom never will. So that's already talking about on a budget, right? Like it doesn't, I mean, yes, it might take a little bit of creative power, and some people are better at that than others, but that in itself could be your ticket to creating this polished production. And another thing, like adding to that, just to keep things simple, right? Because I could be going in all of the in-person production, is don't over think your event, but also do not skimp on rehearsals and technical checks, because that's something that will definitely make or break your event. But with that in mind, don't forget that those hours that you're spending on technical checks and rehearsals account towards budgeting. So you have to be able to include the test hours part of your budget, because that is going to go into it. Like, you're going to have to pay the production crew. Maybe pre-recording your content is a more budget-friendly option in that case, and you should take advantage of that. Another thing that I was going to mention here is, like, for example, because I just came out of 2 events in which I had 2 hybrid events with 2 different experiences, 2 different experiences. One of them was really good. The other one was not so good. And the difference in that was the crew, the production crew that I had for those events. So with that being said, having quality labor, having professionals that have done in-person events and have done virtual events is not just a cost-effective way, instead of having 2 different production houses to do the 2 different things. Like, here's the in-person production, here's the live stream production, but trying to find a partner that can do both. But again, goes back to being able to vet those people and be able to say, hey, I've worked with them before. I know the type of production they can deliver. I know the type of people that they are, and I know that they provide quality with everything that they do. And that could be a budget saver, where you have the same production house doing the different things. That's not to say that you're going to use less people. With hybrid event, by default, you're going to have more people behind that tech table in the back than before, because it's not just, the audio engineer and the video switcher in the room and the lighting tech. You're going to have a broadcasting engineer and a director and a producer, and you're going to have all these people that not just only manage, like the producer could be managing the in-person and the virtual, but someone will have to call the show. Someone will have to be able to make some decisions on to, okay, what goes in person versus what goes online, and having the broadcast engineer as well to be able to not babysit the stream, but make sure that nothing goes
troubleshoot. Be there to troubleshoot.
Exactly. That just means more people. And then cameras, you can't just have, like you said, like the one main iMac in the back of the room, even if he has like this, long throw lens that you can zoom in all the way. That usually gives quite of a boring and very tiring look fast for an online audience. So you're going to want to have a few different cameras with different looks that could either be manned, which means additional guys or gals, or PTZ cameras that could, be something that you could save on labor, but you still have to have someone to be able to control them. So there's a lot of things that go into this hybrid production, and just knowing about it without being afraid and terrified because your head is already like filled of like, oh my gosh, I don't even understand what she's talking about. I think leaving putting fear aside and just starting with, just start smaller. Like we right now are thinking about taking a virtual event and adding a small in-person audience. And at one point in the fall, we're going to do planning for a in-person gathering and adding a virtual audience, right? But right now we're like in the other part of the equation where we had a virtual experience. Now we're trying to add a smaller gathering, and our cost will follow with that. But then eventually we're going to want to have this in-person event that might grow and still be able to reach a wider audience with the virtual aspect of that, right? So start somewhere small, whatever you're comfortable with. If you had success with a virtual event in last year, start there and then add the smaller component of in-person. If you only did in-person gatherings and you were really good at planning an in-person event, start there with a smaller event and then add a smaller component to like streaming to YouTube, like you said, Logan, right? Or streaming to Vimeo or somewhere, on a hosted website and on a landing page. And that way you ease into it without, getting caught up in all this technology that it seems scary at first, right? I mean, everybody's like terrified just thinking about it, like, oh my gosh. And as far as, budget goes, think of business events. The budget that it took for a business event, now that's going to become the conference hybrid budget. And that's something that you have to keep in mind. And then for the special events, think of a TV production budget. That's what's going to take to make this event so special, such an amazing experience that nobody's going to want to miss it, and everybody's going to walk away, remembering that event.
Yeah. And I've been thinking about some of my clients, and I feel like they are just kind of discounting hybrid. I was expecting more people that I've been working with to be like, yes, let's do hybrid. But I found myself kind of having to convince them, or just saying like, well, don't discount it. Like, let's have a conversation to see if it makes sense for you or not. And so I feel like, I hope that those who are listening have gained this. And I know that I have today that, well, hopefully we've convinced you that it could be worth it for you. And so at least consider it and have the conversation. And figure out if it makes sense for you. But I'm motivated. I feel like while we've been talking, I have these ideas going through my head. I'm like, oh, what if we did this? Or what if we did this? That could be super fun. And I'm sure I'll have future conversations with you, Anca, too, because you're obviously a wealth of knowledge. So just thank you so much for sharing what you've shared with us today. We truly appreciate it. And then if you could just let our guests know, we're going to put it in the show notes as well, but where can they find you on social media?
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be on the podcast. I feel like this conversation could be going on and on because, in the time that we have, you can barely touch the surface with everything that's to be said. I mean, we barely even touch on sponsorships and what that means as far as ROI goes for hybrid events. And that is really the number one probably seller when it comes to a hybrid event, because your sponsor will want it. As far as where I can be found, Trifan Events, TREEFANEVENTS.com. I promise I can do tech better than I can spell. And then eventdemystify.com is where I land all my podcast episodes. You can find me on Instagram at Trifan_events or Events Demystify Podcast. And on the conversation about, hybrid events, that's pretty much what I'm talking about this entire year, hybrid events. This year, actually, in July, I'm releasing an episode every Friday, which is unlike my regular schedule, just because it's the anniversary month. So it's going to be a lot of talk about hybrid events. And if you care to listen, I know that I listened to this podcast, Better Events, and I was telling both of you how I was taking notes on one of the episodes because you were talking and giving a lot of good tips about contingency planning, and that is so important. And as we move into hybrid events, that's even more so important because it has to be considered and you have to have a plan. Again, going back to hoping for the best, but planning for the worst is really not something that should be taken lightly. And we'll make sure that your event, is a successful one and a great experience, which is what we all want.
Anca, you read my mind because yes, the sporting event that I just did, I was essentially the in-person producer and we had a TV producer, but we did have to sit down and have a mutual rehearsal and scenario planning of what happens, you do have to prioritize. Yeah. What happens if the stream goes down? Does the event stop and wait for the stream to come back? Or does the event continue and you have something else to entertain the virtual audience? And with TV and live sports, they've been having to do that forever, but it is something that you have to have that conversation about. If you just assume you both know what you're doing, things are going to happen. So I feel like we're going to have you on again, Anca, by like the end of the year. We'll have to do an episode update, because I feel like you're already a wealth of knowledge and you'll have learned so much more even in the coming 6 months. So
I
we
look
really
forward to
appreciate
this.
you
Exchange notes on those events. Oh, that's priceless.
Exactly. Oh, the mind melding that's happening. I know our episode with you on your podcast is talking about some community over competition. And I feel like this is just also another good mind melding here. So again, we really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, before we wrap us up, we're going to do a quick bonus tip, and I'll be bringing us the bonus tip of the week. And so mine is to think about what the first 5 minutes of your virtual event include. And I say this because I think a lot of people forget about it. You think about your keynote speaker or your breakouts or your activities, but you forget about whatever the first 5 minutes. This is the first impression you're giving your attendees. And so whatever feeling you want them to feel, whether it's a joyful celebration or a more serious discussion, those 5 minutes help you set the tone. And so what do I mean by that? That's opening with if you have an opening slideshow or a slide as people enter your virtual event with background music that is invoking whatever theme you want. So again, if it's a celebratory webinar or event, making sure you're playing celebratory music. Or if you want people to be a little bit more personal and open, maybe starting with breakouts or having a host on screen who's personally welcoming people as they come in. It's often something when I'm an attendee at an event, you can quickly turn me off if I attend your virtual event and it seems like you didn't think through what you were doing in those first few minutes, whether you were still last minute trying to tech check someone and we're all hearing that tech check, or your opening video doesn't play. It just shows attention to detail, and it's an easy way to either hook your audience in and make them fans forever, or to lose them very quickly. Because unlike in person, where I'd have to walk out and get back in my car and drive away, with virtual events, or even this hybrid as we talked about today, all I have to do is click a little red X and I'm gone. So think about what you're going to do with those first 5 minutes, and you'll be setting yourself up for success.
Awesome tip. Thank you, Logan. That's great. And if you want to follow our podcast and learn more about it, or if you have any topic suggestions, we're always open to any ideas that you have. So feel free to connect. You can reach out to us at thebettereventspod@gmail.com, or follow us on social media at bettereventspod. And in the show notes, we'll link all of these wonderful things that we've talked about today, and we'll also link our personal social media accounts as well for me and Logan, if you want to follow us personally or professionally. And thanks so much for joining us. It's been a great episode. And so until next time, thanks everyone.
Yep. We'll talk to you next Wednesday. Bye, guys.